You are staring at a jar of bacon grease and a bucket of wood ash. Together, these made every bar of soap your great-grandparents ever used, safely, without a single chemical burn. They had one test that made it foolproof: a fresh egg. Drop it in the lye water. If it bobbed just right, the soap would be perfectly mild. And once you know what they knew about that egg, you will understand why this method stayed hidden for nearly a century. This was the lost art of making lye soap from wood ash and kitchen scraps. No special tools, no store-bought chemicals, just the waste your household already produced. For over 2 centuries, every American family relied on it, until a single product changed everything. It was called store soap, and it was anything but safe. That story begins with a barrel, a fire, and an ingredient most people today would pour down the drain. That barrel was a leaching barrel, a hollowed log or a wooden tub with a hole drilled through the bottom. Your great-grandmother would pack it with hardwood ashes, then slowly pour rainwater through. What dripped out was a brown liquid that could strip the hide off an animal. That was the lye, the same chemical that now comes with a skull and crossbones on a plastic bottle. Except she didn't have a plastic bottle. She had an egg. She would lower a fresh egg into the brown liquid. If the egg sank, the lye was too weak. If it floated too high and exposed more than a quarter-sized circle above the surface, it would eat through fat without making soap. But if the egg bobbed so that exactly a circle the size of a ninepence showed above the liquid, the lye was perfect, strong enough to turn grease into a cleaning bar, mild enough to wash a baby's skin. That was not superstition. It was a density test measured without a hydrometer, without a lab, without a single number. And it worked with absolute reliability for over 200 years. This was the knowledge every farm wife, every homesteader, and even every city dweller possessed until the late 1800s. Because store-bought soap did not just change the market, it erased an entire household skill so thoroughly that today, if you try to make soap this way without the egg trick, you can hurt yourself badly. And the man who started that transformation was a candle maker named William Proctor. In 1837, he teamed up with his brother-in-law James Gamble in Cincinnati. They boiled huge vats of animal fat and lye under pressure, producing bars faster than any farm wife could. But here was the difference. The farm wife tested her lye every single batch. The factory didn't. They used chemical indicators that were often wrong. The result was soap that looked white and smelled clean, but left chemical burns on the people who used it. And the worst part is what they added next, to cover up the mistakes. It was a compound the ancient soap makers would have instantly recognized as poison, and it sat on your grandparents' bathroom sink every single morning. It was free sodium hydroxide, raw lye that had never chemically bonded to the fat. In the rush to mass-produce soap, the factories began using double the necessary lye to force the reaction to finish in hours instead of weeks. The soap looked perfect, a white, hard bar that lathered thickly, but microscopic crystals of caustic alkali remained trapped inside every sliver. When you washed your hands with it, you were rubbing a diluted drain cleaner into your skin, morning after morning, year after year. The industry knew this by 1902. Internal memos from the largest soap trust referred to the problem as residual sharpness, and their solution was not to cure the soap longer. It was to add a filler that coated the skin with a thin, waxy film that made the irritation feel like softness. That filler was paraffin, a petroleum byproduct, So every morning your grandparents were scrubbing themselves with lye and then sealing the microscopic burns with a layer of crude oil derivative. And the ancient soap makers would have recognized that poisoned instantly because they had a test that prevented it. A test the industry deliberately buried. Before 1890, every farm wife in America could read an egg. She knew that if the shell floated too high in the lye water, the solution was caustic enough to eat through fat and skin alike, so she would add rainwater, drop by drop, until the egg bobbed correctly. That single act, a density titration without a single piece of laboratory glassware, guaranteed that every molecule of lye would find a fat molecule to bond with. The result was a soap that contained exactly 0 free alkali. Never harsh, never drying, safe enough to wash a newborn. The chemistry is irrefutable. The potassium hydroxide from wood ash reacts with the triglycerides in bacon fat or tallow. If the ratios are exactly right, the reaction goes to completion. No leftover lye, no leftover fat, just pure soap and glycerin. The egg test ensured that ratio every single time. It was not folklore. It was process control so elegant that a modern chemical engineer would struggle to design anything simpler. And the soap industry knew this. In 1912, a chemist named Laura Stratford published a paper in the Journal of Industrial Chemistry demonstrating that potash soap made with the egg test produced a final product with a neutral pH within 12 hours of cutting. She tested samples from 20 households across Pennsylvania and Ohio. 80% were perfectly saponified straight from the mold. The remaining 20% reached pH neutrality after a week of curing. By contrast, 6 commercial brands she tested all showed measurable free alkali, even after allegedly being fully cured. One sample, from a Cincinnati factory owned by the Procter & Gamble Company, was so caustic it turned a phenolphthalein indicator deep magenta in under 3 seconds. That is a standard test for unreacted lye. It was still raw enough to eat fabric. Her paper was scheduled to be presented at a national conference in Boston. It was withdrawn 3 days before the event. The reason listed was pressure from institutional sponsors. The sponsors were listed on the conference program: Procter & Gamble, Colgate and Company, and the American Soap and Glycerine Producers Association. The paper was never published in any other journal. Laura Stratford left industrial chemistry within 2 years and became a high school teacher in Cleveland. The only surviving copy of her manuscript was found in a family attic in 1997. I have read it, so can you. I will tell you where it is before this video ends. But first, you need to understand who stepped in next and how close the country came to losing the egg test forever. Because by 1917, the United States had entered the First World War, and that gave the Soap Trust the weapon they could not have bought with money. The federal government needed potash for gunpowder. The soap companies told the War Industries Board that household lye leaching was draining the national supply of potassium. They produced numbers showing that millions of pounds of wood ash potash were being wasted every year by housewives making soap, when the chemical could be converted to potassium nitrate for artillery shells. The numbers were fabricated. A congressional inquiry in 1920 would later show that domestic soap making consumed less than 3% of the nation's potash. But in wartime, no one waited for the inquiry. In August 1917, the U.S. Food Administration issued a bulletin advising women to stop making soap from wood ashes. The bulletin called the practice unpatriotic and wasteful. County extension agents were dispatched to give lectures about the dangers of homemade lye. The word dangerous appeared in every speech. The egg test was never mentioned, because if you admit the test makes it safe, You have no argument left. So they erased it. By 1925, you could not buy a book on home soap making from any major publisher. The sections that had appeared in every farm almanac for a century were removed. The skill collapsed in a single generation, and the soap companies filled the vacuum with bars of sodium tallowate loaded with free alkali, masked by paraffin and heavy perfume, and sold as gentle enough for a baby's skin. But one community never stopped. They did not read the bulletins. They did not attend the extension lectures. They used no electricity and owned no factory soap. In Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, the Amish kept leaching lye the same way their ancestors had in Switzerland before they ever crossed the ocean. They used hickory ash, rainwater, and an egg from their own hens. They stirred the lye water into hot lard with a wooden paddle until the mixture traced like honey. They knew when the soap was ready, not by a calendar, but by a zap test passed down in Pennsylvania Dutch. Touch the tip of your tongue to the bar. If it zaps like a battery, the lye is still active, and the soap is not yet soap. Wait another month. If it tastes simply of clean fat, it is ready. Perfect saponification. Zero caustic residue. The same zero that Laura Stratford had proven in 1912. And in 2018, a young Amish farmer named Samuel Lapp brought a bar of his family's 6-month-old soap to a chemistry laboratory at Pennsylvania State University. He asked a single question: "Is this safe for my daughter's eczema?" The researcher who took the sample was a polymer chemist named Dr. Priya Nair. She was not a soap historian. She had no interest in cultural traditions. She ran the bar through gas chromatography, pH microelectrode testing, and an alkali titration assay. What she found broke every safety benchmark the commercial industry had published for a century. The number was so clean, so absolute, it should have been the headline on every health news site in the country. And it never was. That number was 0.0. Dr. Nair filed her report and never spoke of it publicly. She didn't have to, because hidden inside that 0.0 was a second number. One that rewrote what we think we know about every bar of soap currently sitting in your bathroom. A modern commercial soap is legally permitted to contain up to 0.1% free alkali. That is the safety ceiling set by the FDA. 0.1% sodium hydroxide, unreacted, sitting on your skin every time you wash. Most store soaps come in right at that line. They have to. Full saponification takes weeks, and no factory can hold inventory that long. So they cut the cure short, leave trace lye in the bar, and depend on the paraffin filler to trick your nerves. An Amish soap, cured for 6 months, hit 0.0, not 0.1, not 0.05. Absolute neutralization. The bar was chemically incapable of causing irritation. Samuel Lapp had brought the sample because his daughter's eczema was so severe she bled through her sleeves at night. Dermatologists had prescribed steroid creams, oatmeal baths, a dozen lotions. Nothing worked for more than a day. His wife, Miriam, had washed the baby with the family soap for a week. The eczema receded. The open patches closed. The child slept. That was the clinical outcome. But the chemistry is what matters. Dr. Nair found that the soap retained its full glycerin content, something commercial soap strips out and sells separately as a moisturizing ingredient. The same companies that sold you the drying bar would then sell you a glycerin lotion to fix the damage the bar caused. The Amish bar gave you both in one step. It never removed the glycerin in the first place. And the only thing that made that possible was the time they gave it. 6 months on a wooden rack in a cool barn, the lye slowly consuming the last traces of fat until nothing remained but clean soap and its own humectant. But here is what the industry will never tell you. The egg test was not just a density float, it was a direct titration of potassium carbonate. When you leach wood ash with water, you are dissolving potassium carbonate along with potassium carbonate, along with potassium hydroxide. The ratio between those two determines the soap's character. Too much hydroxide, and the soap is harsh. Too much carbonate, and it will not saponify at all. The egg, with its precise, specific gravity, found the exact window where the hydroxide was strong enough to attack fat, but the carbonate buffered the solution so it could never become caustic. That is why no Amish soap ever burned a child. That is why the tradition survived 3 centuries without a single poisoning. And that is what the commercial industry erased when it switched from potash to sodium hydroxide. Sodium lye makes a harder bar, a faster reaction, a prettier shelf display. It also makes a soap that needs accelerators, neutralizers, and moisturizer replacements added back in to approximate what potash did naturally. The Amish never solved a formulation problem because they never created one. They just did what worked, and they waited. In 2020, a state agricultural extension office in Ohio proposed a workshop series on traditional soap making as a heritage skill. The curriculum included the egg test. The American Cleaning Institute, the trade association that represents every major soap brand in the country, sent a legal notice calling the workshop a public safety hazard. They cited the danger of homemade lye, the risk of chemical burns, the lack of standardized testing. They did not mention the egg. They did not mention Laura Stratford. They did not mention the 0.0. The workshop was cancelled within 48 hours. The knowledge was suppressed again, not by a wartime board this time, but by a letter on a law firm's letterhead, and almost nobody in that county knew the letter had even been written. That leads me to the piece I promised you, the document that shows exactly how close this knowledge came to being patented away. In 1931, a man named Charles Dalton filed a patent for a device he called the domestic potashometer. It was a glass cylinder with a calibrated float designed to measure lye strength for home soap making. Marketed as a modern replacement for the egg, Dalton had worked as a chemical engineer at Colgate. His patent application included a chart that translated egg float positions into specific gravity readings. He had reverse engineered the traditional test and turned it into a product he could sell. But the patent examiner rejected the application. The reason cited was prior art. The device was too similar to an existing method. The method was the egg. The Patent Office formally ruled that floating an egg in lye was a recognized scientific procedure, one that had been in public use since at least 1740. The decision effectively placed the egg test in the public domain forever. No company could patent it, no corporation could own it, no court could stop a grandmother from doing it in her kitchen. The knowledge was locked open, and that is why you can still do it today. Everything you need to start is in the next part. Start with a clean hardwood fire, oak, hickory, or maple, never pine or softwood. They leave resin that ruins the lye. Collect the white ash, the stuff so fine it floats like dust. You need enough to fill a 5-gallon bucket halfway. Take a wooden barrel or a plastic tub with a hole drilled near the bottom. Pack a layer of straw or hay on the floor of the barrel. Then fill it with the ash, tamping it down gently. Set the barrel on bricks so you can slide a glass jar under the hole. Now, pour rainwater slowly over the top. Not tap water. Rainwater is soft, No minerals to interfere. What drips out the bottom over the next several hours is your lye water. It will be brown, the color of strong tea. That is potassium hydroxide, leached straight from the ashes. It is caustic. Wear gloves. Wear goggles. Do this outside. Now comes the test that kept generations safe. Take a fresh egg, shell intact, and lower it into the cooled lye water. If it sinks, the lye is too weak, and you need to run it through fresh ashes again. If it bobs so high that more than a quarter-sized circle of shell shows above the surface, the lye is too strong and will eat through fat without making soap. Add rainwater, a spoonful at a time, and test again. You are aiming for the egg to float with exactly a circle the size of a ninepence visible above the liquid. That is the sweet spot. The specific gravity at that point is roughly 1.06, strong enough to break down fat molecules completely, mild enough to leave no free alkali behind. The egg is your hydrometer. It never breaks. It never needs calibration. It has worked since the 1700s. Next, the fat. Your great-grandparents saved every scrap. Bacon drippings from breakfast, the white grease from roasting a pork shoulder, the trimmings from a beef roast. You render it by heating gently and straining through cheesecloth. You need about 5 pounds of clean fat. Melt it in a large stainless steel pot. Do not use aluminum, the lye will pit it. Heat the fat until it is just liquid, not hot. Now slowly pour the lye water into the fat, stirring constantly with a wooden spoon. Pour away from your face. The mixture will turn opaque and then begin to thicken. You are looking for trace. That is the moment the spoon leaves a faint line on the surface that does not immediately disappear. It can take anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour. When trace holds, pour the soap into a wooden mold lined with wax paper, cover with a cloth, and let it sit in a cool place for 24 hours. It will heat up on its own as the saponification finishes. Unmold and cut into bars. Now you wait, at least 1 week before you can handle it without gloves. 6 months before it reaches zero free alkali. You can test it the Amish way. Touch the tip of your tongue to the bar. If it zaps like a battery, it is not ready. If it tastes simply of clean fat, it is perfect. That zap test is the same pH check your tongue uses on a lemon, repurposed for soap. And once the soap is ready, it cleans laundry, dishes, skin, and floors. The glycerin stays inside, so your hands never dry out. The lye is gone, consumed entirely by the fat. Nothing remains but a bar that costs about 8 cents to make. The Amish never lost this. They never needed a patent, a safety label, or a government bulletin to validate it. They had an egg, a barrel, and patience. And now so do you. What the commercial industry spent a century trying to bury is sitting in your fireplace ashes and your breakfast pan. The only thing missing was the recipe. Your family had this knowledge once. Every family did. It was not lost to time. It was taken, buried under patent filings and wartime bulletins, and a century of marketing that called safe soap dangerous. The question now is simple. What else did they take? What else is sitting in plain sight, waiting for someone to remember? Because the same forces that erased the egg test did not stop at soap. They came for the fuel you burn, the fabric you wear, and the light in your living room, and you have been paying for their version long enough. The knowledge never died. It just went quiet. And quiet things have a way of coming back. I will show you that next. Hit subscribe. Not for me, for what comes next. If this made sense to you, the link in the first pinned comment has something I put together specifically for people who see the world the same way. I will see you there.